Well, boys and girls, I can't believe that I have lived long enough to see this day. But the Kagerou project is finally complete. It has been many long years, almost a decade at this point. But the Kagerou project, on the 15th of February, was finally tied up. Now, this isn't to say that the Kagerou project is over. Jin has assured us many times that the Kagerou project will last as long as he does. And certainly, if nothing else, more music will come periodically, and perhaps someday, before we're dead, we might see the new anime that was announced way back when. But at least for now, at least in this very second, the story, all of the stories, have come to a close. The final chapter of the manga Kagerou Daze was finally released. With it, despite the fact that the story has been in the making for, like I said, almost a decade now, the final chapter still brought a lot to the table, still completely changed how we interpret and how we work through many scenes we've seen previously, and was a vital stepping stone in the story. Mekaku City Actors finished 2014, something like that. The novels came to a close last year, and now the manga is finally done too. And with that, we can paint a real clear and obvious picture of what the Kagerou project is as a whole. But let's start by just recapping for the uninitiated what happened in the end of the manga. So the manga, as of the last handful of chapters, was focusing on the Mekakushidan dealing with the Clearing Eyes as they do. Many members of the Mekakushidan are dead. Momo is dead. Hibiya is dead. Takane died, officially. Who else died? Kido is dead. Seto and Kano die. A lot of people die. Most of the Mekakushidan is dead. And the ending of the story is very similar to the ending of Summertime Reload, which I discussed back when it came out in December, in English. And that's faced with the Clearing Eyes and the death of most of the Mekakushidan. Mary uses her abilities as the Queen Snake, with the many snakes that have now gathered around her, to open the Kagerou Daze, swallow the Clearing Eyes, and keep them trapped there effectively forever. It's the same ending on paper as the ending of the novels. But despite the fact that on paper these two stories have a very similar ending, they both bring very obvious and different things to the table, and very important things to the table. The novels were all about the installation of hope. The Mekakushidan actually beats the Clearing Eyes pretty thoroughly in the novels. Half of them are stuck in the Kagerou Daze. Probably more than half, actually. It's everyone except Seto, Mary, and Hibiya. But most of the members get stuck in the Kagerou Daze, but that's not the biggest deal in the world. They work out a way to communicate with each other, and they could live, I don't want to say happily, but they could live alright. It isn't the end of the world, but they still choose to rewrite time because they believe in a better future. This ending, the ending of the manga, is a lot more bleak, but also a lot more important to the story. So that really brings us around to the revelations of the final chapter of the manga and how it recharacterizes how we understand the story. So like I said, who's alive at this point? Mary, Ayano, Shintaro? That might be it. Mary, Ayano, and Shintaro might be the only characters that are still alive at the end of the Kagerou Daze manga. So the Clearing Eyes has been swallowed by the Kagerou Daze. Mary is very sad, Ayano is very sad, but Ayano thinks of a plan. So you have to remember that Manga 2 is remarkably different from every other timeline in the story. It is the only timeline in which Shintaro does not know Ayano. It is the only timeline in which plenty of things are the case. It is wholly unique. And the reasoning for this was always kind of have a bit of a head scratcher. Wasn't sure, why the timeline would divert in these ways. And it kind of becomes a lot more clear in through this chapter of the manga as we see that Ayano relays to Mary this plan that she has. And this plan is for Mary to turn Ayano into a snake. So we know from Mekaku City Actors, we have known for probably 4 or 5 years at this point, that the way the story ends up reaching the actual happy end is that Shintaro comes to remember the fact that he has an eye ability, that Shintaro has the snake of retaining eyes. This is something that is described that long ago in one of the timelines, Mary gave to him. And the details of this have never been clear. That is one of my major problems with Mekaku City Actors, is that The solution is brought about in this way that is never clear to us. Mary and Shintaro made a plan at some point, but we never saw it, and this is the plan. It's that Ayano reasons that the snakes can grant life. The snakes are the life force of all of the members of the Mekakushidan, because they died. So Ayano reasons that, logistically, in her head, that a life could be turned into a snake. And Mary is evidently able to do this, as Mary turns Ayano into the snake of retaining eyes, and gives this ability to Shintaro, who does not have an ability. And this cuts us back after Ayano, turns into the snake of retaining eyes. We cut back to a scene that happened very early in the manga. Happened after the first bad end, where Shintaro was speaking to an Ayano in the classroom, and it cut to Ayano at the funeral, and she said, why do you think I died? They were going over some math problems, some schoolwork, and she said, well, I have a question you won't be able to answer, and it's, why do you think I died? Now, that scene is, of course, very reminiscent to Lost Time Memory. It's very reminiscent to things we've seen in Mekaku City Actors, and it wasn't very clear at the time what exactly was going on with that. And it's clear now that this is Shintaro speaking to Manga 2 Ayano, which means that, fantastic timeline-wise, Manga 2 is probably one of the earliest chapters. We know that Route XX has to be one of, if not the first, timeline, and this, by necessity, has to be 2, because Manga 2 is the creation of the retaining eyes, and of course the retaining eyes needs to have seen all of the other timelines. So it's explained in this. It cuts back to that scene from probably like 40 chapters ago. And we now know that the reason Ayano died, or to answer her question, do you know why I died? Ayano died so that Shintaro could have this eye ability, and that that a brighter future would be possible. Mary resets time, but Shintaro now has the snake of retaining eyes. And Ayano, who is Yaki, is the snake that we have been seeing throughout Mekaku City Actors, and is the ability that has been alluded to all this time, says that she will remember everything until Shintaro is able to use his own eyes and walk towards the future, which of course is what happens in Mekaku City Actors. It ties everything in a nice bow. And by that I mean this is the last valuable piece of information that the story, I think, was lacking in its telling. We know everything that happens, and now with this piece of knowledge, with Manga 2, you can draw a very clear line, where if you wanted to see the Kagerou Project chronologically, you would probably listen to the music, because always listen to the music. But in terms of the literal tellings of the story, we know that it is Route XX, which, again, not a literal telling of the story, but that is the foundation, is Route XX. But then Manga 2, Manga 1, the novels, Mekaku City Actors. The second manga timeline, followed by the first manga timeline, followed by the novels, which the novels, of course, end with Shintaro making reference to the retaining eyes. So it obviously cannot come before Manga 2. And then the final timeline being Mekaku City Actors, where it's all tied up in a nice bow. This took an extremely long amount of time, and it is, historically, the Kagerou Project has always been like this. It has always been revelations that recharacterize the past. I've yet to do it, but I'm definitely excited to go back and rewatch parts of Mekaku City Actors where Shintaro was talking to his snake, because his snake took the shape of Ayano, and of course everyone just took that in a metaphoric way, because obviously it's not Ayano, but it is literally Ayano. It is literally Ayano. It is maybe, in fact, the first Ayano that Shintaro ever... No, you know what? This does complicate things, because I had a very strong declaration that Route XX was first, but I don't know if I can actually say that anymore, because it seems like this actually probably would have to be first, because in Route XX, Shintaro, of course, knew who Ayano was, and it seems like the retaining eyes would have kicked in, but it also seems like NA would not be Pepe NA, she'd be XXNA, so it's a little unclear, as it always has been, where certain parts of the story link with one another, but the important part is that all the points of the story are here. To give just a sort of brief general thoughts of Manga 2 in general, Manga 2 might be my favorite timeline in all of them. It might be my favorite telling of the story. If not, it's the novels. The novels are fantastic. Summertime Reload is fantastic. That novel, jumping around to all the perspectives, was extremely heartfelt and emotional. I think in general the novels hit higher points, but the second telling in the manga is fascinating. I don't think it should be read chronologically because you get more out of the second telling in the manga once you already know the characters. But I think Hiyori is actually alive. Tangent, but I think Hiyori is also alive. You don't see her at all in the last chapter, but I don't remember her dying. So anyway, the second timeline of the manga allows a lot of the characters to act in different ways and to be important in ways that they are not in any other timeline. You get to see Hiyori be an active member of the Mekakushidan. You get to see Ayano be a much more active character. You get to see Momo and Shintaro interact, and their interactions are so much more limited in every other timeline of the story. It really allows the characters to breathe in this way, and it's not just for the sake of itself. It's not character action for the sake of character interaction, because by the end of it, the characters still are developing. The Kagerou Project is a time loop, but it's not a fixed time loop. It's not like Steins Gate. The character development isn't being reset. The characters are growing. Shintaro is definitely growing, and there's implication things like there are loose ends, and there is implication that the characters are growing through the loops, perhaps on a subconscious level. Mary definitely seems like she's always growing. If you look at Mary at the end of this time loop, the manga 2 time loop, and compare her to like Mary at the end of Summertime Reload, they're not really the same at all. This Mary kind of gives in, and she really feels like she has failed because everyone is dead, and they had this plan, and they were trying so hard, and it really hurts her. But you compare that to Mary at the end of Summertime Reload, who has experienced pretty much the same tragedy, but unlike this Mary, she is strong. She is able to pick herself up. She is in fact stronger than Seto. She guides Seto to being strong with her. That determination, that strength of resilience is built off of the fact that we get to see Mary be so weak here. The Kagerou Project, when you take all of the different mediums, when you take all the different tellings in the story and you compare them and you try and understand how the characters go from one point to another, this manga is really kind of like the Act 2 of the story. If we look at the story, if we consider the story on a whole, as a whole, on the broad, all the different mediums and all the different tellings, this really is sort of, it's the Act 2, it's the Empire Strikes Back. The characters all end in this really wretched state. Most of them died. A lot of them died with tons of regret, especially like Hiyori and Momo die horribly. They die being betrayed, they die feeling unfulfilled. It is not a fun time for them at all. You get like Mary ends very broken. Ayano sort of instills some hope in her a little, but not really. Ayano gives her life so she can become the snake. We get a very touching moment in which Ayano, as she's disappearing, claims, or she sort of says to Shintaro that she fell in love with him. And this is of course special because they didn't have the past. They didn't meet in school, but these two people still met and fell in love in that way, and that's very beautiful. But yeah, the characters are downtrodden in everything that they're doing, everything that they had to experience. But from this very, very low point, there is the hope. There is the hope of, we have the retaining eyes, we're going to work to make it better. And this sort of brings you into the novels, which tell a very similar story, but instead of this story where the Mekakushidan is splintered and the characters aren't really interacting, and some of them are like, there's a whole chunk of the story where Momo and Shintaro are like actively working against Kano and Konoha. And you counter that with the novels, in which all the characters are able to come together, and there is not this separation. And they work together and they still fail. They still aren't really able to do it, but they get so much closer. And they get close enough that they have the resolution to push one more time. And that final push is Mekaku City Actors, where the fruits of everyone's labor, all of the suffering, is paid off by the fact that they are able to beat Clearing Eyes, that Shintaro's retaining eyes, that now we understand is, even in its own right, a sacrifice that Ayano made in one of the many timelines, has finally amounted to something, and that everyone is able to reach this perfect happy end. It makes the happy end of Mekaku City Actors feel less unjustified. When I watched Mekaku City Actors, I was very unpleased that Ayano and Hiyori were alive, because it felt like it was detracting from the message of the story, where, of course, one of the big themes of the Kagerou Project as a whole is about coping with loss. But through having the manga and the novels, which are incredibly important, I think they are invaluable in terms of the importance of events in the story, making the story events feel important, connecting the story. You really need to experience them if you haven't and you care about the Kagerou Project. But having these things now exist, the ending does not feel as cheap, because you now really feel the sacrifice that it's built upon. The ending wasn't just, Ayano and Hiyori live because I said so. It is they finally are happy, and this is after, and the ending is earned. It is the result of all of these timelines in which no one was happy. It is the result of all these timelines where Kuroha really killed everyone, but every time he just got a little closer. This is something that I feel like a lot of looping stories don't capitalize on enough. Now, any looping story obviously has this sort of moment where the characters keep butting their head against the wall, right? You think of something like, I don't know, Steins Gate, and you get Okabe and Rintaro in the middle portion, the middle arc, just trying and trying and trying, and the time is looping, but he keeps failing. And that is important because you understand, how hard he's tried. That makes, my favorite ending of the Steins Gate visual novel is Suzuha's ending for this reason. It really captures this feeling of devotion and helplessness, but how hard are you going to try for no different result? How much are you willing to give away? And the Kagerou Project, I felt, was lacking that, but it ultimately ends up doing that even better than, I think, something like Steins Gate. But it was lacking that for a while. We knew it was a time-living story. We knew that the characters kept dying, but we didn't see many bad ends for a long time. Now, I'm asking you to kind of put your headspace back into 2014 when Mekaku City Actors was coming out. When Mekaku City Actors was coming out, the only other end of the story we had was the first manga timeline, and that's a bad end. But that is a bad end where the Don is just having a good time, and then suddenly Kuroha appears, and in like 3 pages everyone's dead. And you didn't get this idea of struggle. You weren't under the impression that the characters had been fighting, earnestly fighting for so long. It's like, to go back to Steins Gate, the latter chapters are able to have the weight they do because you have seen Okabe struggle and struggle and struggle and fail and fail and fail, and you've seen that wear him down, and you've seen how that has changed him, and you didn't get that feeling from the characters because you didn't see the routes. But where something like the Kagerou Project now does not have as many loops as Steins Gate. Steins Gate, in the portion where Okabe is just butting his head against the wall, he goes back more times than there are routes of the Kagerou Project, but each one is much longer. Taking manga 2 and taking the novels, they're both bad ends. The only good end is still Mekaku City Actors. They're both bad ends, but they both feel weighty, they're meaty, they are long, and they develop the characters. Everyone takes the cast in a different direction. You get to see certain characters grow here and certain characters grow there. Oh, Mary's really weak in this one, but she gets to be strong in the novels. Ayano was kind of selfish and self-centered, but then she grows up to be, of course, the selfless saint after she is now the retaining eyes. You get to see Shintaro's arc, how, this, in the manga, he does not reconcile with Momo. He doesn't get to, he interacts with her, but ultimately Momo and Shintaro never get to really be honest with themselves, and that eats away at Shintaro. He spends an entire chapter grieving Momo's loss, and it is one of the best chapters. It is some of the best of the Kagerou Project, period. And you get other things like, for a long time I was kind of a little upset that I never got a moment with Takane and Shintaro. There's a little moment in From the Darkness, and I really liked that moment, but, these two characters who are so the same, and are so important to each other, but it's all just in the subtext. But then in the second route of the manga, you get that beautiful chapter 60, I believe it is, where Takane dies, but she dies thanking Shintaro, and both Takane and Shintaro burst out in tears, and they're crying over how important meeting each other was, and how perhaps there was nothing more important in either of their lives. How they saved each other, and how all it took for their lives to have meaning was interacting with each other, and that is such a powerful moment that it carries you through the rest of the series. And everything that you would want, every interaction, exists somewhere. It's all a piece of the puzzle. And now that the puzzle is complete, now that the manga is over, and you can look at the Kagerou Project as a whole, and you can understand this arc, you can understand how you go from the happiness to the struggle, and how that concludes. Even characters like Azumi, who only existed in backstory, the idea of Azumi being a character is brought up in the second round of the manga, where people allude to Azumi. Kano turns into Azumi, and the characters grow this sympathy for her, which culminates in the novels, where Azumi comes back at the end to help everyone, and believe in her granddaughter, and believe in the future. And even though it ends up ultimately with another reset, Azumi made that stand that she wasn't able to. And she was able to protect her granddaughter, and she was able to make a difference. Every character gets a conclusion somewhere, and it feels now that the story is complete. Because it is. It is finally in a place where you can experience it all and go, yes, I understand. I understand the struggles, I understand these characters. And you have to work for it. But if you put in that work, you get something profoundly special. I am tremendously happy with the ending of the manga, if that wasn't clear enough. It is a little sudden, maybe? It wasn't really clear for a while, really, that the manga was amping up to its end. I remember I saw the end of chapter messages that were like, oh yeah, the manga is like wrapping up. I remember when it was announced that the 13th volume would be the last one, and I'm like, wait a minute. The 12th volume ended. The end of the 12th volume was like 5 chapters ago. That must mean there's only like a very small handful of chapters left in this manga, and then it's over? And I was worried. But I do think Jin did it. This is not a Mekaku City Actors. The ending of the manga is beautiful. It is tragic, but it is hopeful. And it is a very important step. And I think another thing the manga does great is really making the Clearing Eyes a less awful villain. The Clearing Eyes has always been more interesting in what the Clearing Eyes represented than what the Clearing Eyes actually was. The Clearing Eyes is most interesting as just this idea, this concept of rejecting death and trying to grasp at whatever straw you can to keep going and to persist, and how, that concept is relatable, and how the characters all are kind of like that and need to learn and accept that life is not like that, and life is finite, and that's okay. But as an actual, literal character, the Clearing Eyes was never that interesting. The manga does a lot to make the Clearing Eyes more interesting. It goes into what the Clearing Eyes' goal actually is, how it is this struggle for identity and for purpose. And I don't think it's great, but it's definitely a lot better than it was. The Clearing Eyes, I thought, was always one of the weakest parts of the story. The most interesting parts aren't, the Mekakushidan fighting the Clearing Eyes. It's Shinsuro's gradual character arc with Takane and with Haruka, and seeing him cope with the death of his friends, and it's the character moments. And that is and always will be true, but the actual plot is a lot better. So, yeah, everyone, the Kagerou Project is over. You can go right now and experience the entire Kagerou Project. And I kind of hope that it stays like this. There can always be more music, because music isn't intruding on the story, per se. The album Mekaku City Reload came out in November, and I don't know that any of those songs changed the Kagerou Project. They just expounded on the feelings of the characters, and that's fine. I don't think it did any harm. In fact, I think it did good, but I don't think the story hurts without any of the music. They're all interesting, and they, relay the characters and their feelings in different ways, but I don't think it is hurting. I do think that if ever we see the day that another anime comes out, I will definitely approach it with some hesitation. Not only because Mekaku City Actors isn't really very good, but also just that the story now feels complete and I don't want it to be touched. But now, with that ending, the Kagerou Project is this, remarkably beautiful Utsuge that ends with hope, ends with all of these great things. And it is still a shame that the final chapter is Mekaku City Actors. Not the final chapter of the manga, the final chapter of the story as a whole. But ultimately, it does nothing to take away from the pathos behind all of these people, all of these characters struggling and failing, but continuing through every step of the way until they finally reach that happiness. I am so happy that I have been able to experience the end of this story that I've been following for most of my adult life. I've been following the Kagerou project since like 2011, and now, 8 years later, I can finally send it careening into a fire because it's over. And that's a good thing. I'm sure that at some point I'll be back to talk about the Kagerou project, because even though it's over, it's not over, and it never will be over. The Kagerou project is going to keep existing. It will be a part of culture as long as Jin believes in it. And Jin has already talked about things like making a next generation, skipping ahead to a new group of kids and their tragedy, where Shintaro is like a school teacher, and it's maybe like the children of the Mekakushidan and their friends, and I'd be down for that. But no matter what happens, the story that we have now, this complete cycle of music, a manga, a series of books, and an anime, are fantastic. I have to sit on the Kagerou Daze manga for a little longer, just let it stew in my stomach. But it is in the same caliber as things like Pandora Hearts and things like Lucifer and the Biscuit Hammer, which are as some of my favorite stories, definitely in the medium, but in general. It's a little hard to compare the Kagerou Daze manga to other manga because it is not a self-contained story. There are self-contained stories within it, but it of course plays off of different things in different mediums. But the story we have is fantastic. The manga is incredibly important to the story. It is incredibly important to the characters and their development, and it ended with grace. So everyone, go buy the manga. The final volume is being released in March in Japanese. I think in April. Either March or April, the 12th volume is being released in English. The first 11 are all available in English right now. You can go on Amazon and buy them. And I definitely think they're worth your money and worth the read. Same thing with the novels, and, Mekaku City Actors has its moments. But for now, the summer is ended. And all of us can go off. We can all go and see the world that has been created and laid out before us in its entirety. And that is a wonderful thing. Goodbye for now, everyone. May we meet again in a better world. I'll see all of you in the next timeline. Bayonara.